Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles. Now, as you're no doubt aware, I do like to show you things that aren't just tier 10 ships fighting tier 10 battles all the time. The problem with that is that low tier gameplay tends to be, how can we put this, not very interesting to watch. Mostly down to the fact that people playing at tier 3, for example, don't really know what they're doing. It's not their fault, of course, they're new to the game. But that doesn't really change the undeniable fact that watching most low-tier battles in World of Warships is a bit like watching a train wreck unfolding in slow motion. You're not really sure exactly what's going to happen, but you know it's going to end up in a pretty nasty mess. That is, at least, until the Research Bureau was introduced. And so now we're occasionally seeing players like a Tothek 101 here in the Tier 3 British destroyer, the Valkyrie, who has reset his progress to HMS Daring and is now regrinding the British destroyer line in order to take advantage of the benefits offered by the Research Bureau. Now, you could argue that this is something like letting a fox loose in a henhouse, and, well, there's a certain element of truth in that description. But if nothing else, it does allow us to actually gain something from watching a low-tier battle other than the morbid fascination of watching the train wreck unfold. For once, we might actually learn something. Straight away you can tell that a Tothek knows what he's doing because he hasn't immediately taken his destroyer into Iron Bottom Sound in the middle of the Solomon's map. He's fired his torpedoes in there, but he has more sense than to actually sail in there right at the beginning. Instead, he's cruising north and looking for his first victim. And of course, because this is a tier 3 battle, there are no shortage of victims, and it's usually a destroyer, and today is no exception. A destroyer who hasn't quite figured out how this whole stealth thing works, and instead is just, well, I suppose you could say he's just trying to see how quickly he can win the suicide lottery. But again, this is tier 3, you never know how many of them he's going to take with him, but that's first blood for a Tothek, and nobody was really surprised by that, I suppose. There are 2 carriers in this game, by the way, just in case you hadn't noticed, and one of them has actually managed to land some torpedoes on that friendly Wix. He may actually win second prize in the suicide lottery if he's not careful, but it looks like he at least has the sense to try to get out of there under the cover of a smokescreen. Meanwhile, a Tothek has decided that that enemy Phra Ruang is the biggest threat with its deep-water torpedoes to his teammates up here in the cruisers and battleships, particularly his division mate in the König Albert. The Phra Ruang has managed to go undetected. A Tothek, on the other hand, is spotted, but there's a very handy smokescreen left here by the Wix, who has managed to survive, although he's on perilously low health. And American smokescreens are great. They last forever, unlike the British smokescreen, which doesn't last very long, but has a very, very short cooldown. So in the full spirit of transatlantic cooperation, a Tothek is making the most of this smokescreen while it lasts. One of the good things, well, not just about the Valkyrie, but about most of the British destroyers, is the excellent performance of their high explosive shells. The downside of taking cover inside a smokescreen is that, particularly down here at tier 3, when nobody has hydroacoustic search, often the first indication that you have that you're about to get torpedoed is when you get torpedoed. As it happens, a Tothek was paying attention to the minimap. He did see the enemy torpedo bombers coming in, and sure enough, there they are. Now, leaving the smokescreen when he did, okay, it meant he didn't get torpedoed, but it did also mean that he did get spotted by the torpedo attack planes. However, they aren't really interested in him. They're going after much bigger, juicier, and easier to hit targets like the cruisers and battleships behind him. So, evacuating the smokescreen ahead of time when he didn't really cost him anything, and in any case, by the time he's turned around and is heading back towards the enemy, that smokescreen laid by the Wix has largely expired by now. But there are a lot of enemy ships lurking on the far side of that island, including but not limited to that Nassau, both of the surviving enemy destroyers, the Phra Ruang, a Campbelltown. There's a Kaiser, a Kawachi, a Friant, and who knows what else lurking inside the smokescreen laid by the Campbelltown. So, better safe than sorry, he pops his own smoke before laying into that enemy Nassau. Now, unfortunately, the team has just suffered its first casualty. The Wix loitered around in the gap between those 2 islands for far too long. However, the enemy Kawachi, keen not to let this insult go unavenged, has just team-killed the friendly Phoenix for reasons that remain a mystery. This is particularly good news for a Tothek's team because that Phoenix was the only thing preventing a whole bunch of friendly ships from sweeping around down there to the southwest and heading north up into the enemy base, and that is exactly what they're doing. Meanwhile, the Tothek has been spotted again. Why didn't you just hang around inside his smokescreen? Well, it's already expiring. British smokescreens do not last very long. The difference is that with the British destroyer smokescreen, you get a lot of charges on a very short cooldown, but the smokescreens themselves don't last much longer than 30 seconds or so. Meanwhile, things are going pretty well for a Tothek's team. They have double the points of the enemy team, although this is a straightforward random battle. It's not domination mode, so there are only the 2 capture points. And they have 3 more kills than the enemy team, leading by 4 kills to 1. A Tothek smokescreen is back off cooldown, so naturally, particularly since there are about to be aircraft overhead, he pops the smoke. No shortage of targets for him to shoot at. Lots and lots and lots of very squishy, lightly armoured cruisers and destroyers. Om nom 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 nom. I'm pretty sure that Phra is not going to survive this. He may even eat those torpedoes, but his acceleration seems to be pretty good. Oh dear, is he going to run aground? I believe he's going to run aground. Well, he didn't really have much of a choice. He could sit still and eat the torpedoes. Or he could full speed ahead and nosedive into the island. Of course, we can see why he was so keen to offer broadside to all of those ships shooting at him. He managed to get his torpedoes away, although they don't appear to have hit anything. Choice of 3 targets, and his torpedoes missed all 3. And he's dead, so not entirely sure it was worth the sacrifice, but hey, it was only a waste of time if he didn't learn anything from the experience. Meanwhile, what the hell is this Kaiser doing? Is he perhaps thinking, haha, I know there's a destroyer there, but the Valkyrie just tried to torpedo the Phra, and his torpedoes can't possibly have reloaded by now, in which case, get used to being wrong. Oh, speaking of the Phra and the Phra's torpedoes, there they are, launched from the other side just before he died, and once again, they haven't hit anything. Still not quite sure what the Kaiser thought was going to happen here. I mean, maybe he was thinking the Phra Ruang back there would come and back him up, and there are only the 2 targets here, and one of them's a tier 3 battleship versus a tier 4 German battleship, but, well, this is a destroyer, and contrary to what the Kaiser may have believed, the torpedoes were reloaded. And so the Kaiser becomes the first recipient of a Tothek's torpedoes in this battle, and his 3rd kill. Meanwhile, the enemy team, while they are still substantially behind on points, they're now only 1 kill behind, with the latest victim, the friendly Clemson, falling victim to that Phra Ruang over there. And it's around about this point that a Tothek is coming to the conclusion that that Royal Thai Navy destroyer is probably one of, if not the most competent players on the enemy team. Who isn't in an aircraft carrier? I mean, the enemy Hosho is 2 kills up, but he can't shoot at the enemy Hosho from here, and he's got a reasonably good chance of being able to chase down and nail that Phra Ruang. The problem is that if that Phra Ruang plays to his strengths, he can make life very difficult for a Tothek, and the Phra Ruang's strengths do not lie in its guns. It's the fact that that is the fastest and the stealthiest tier 3 destroyer in World of Warships. And he is in fact doing exactly that. See, what he's trying to do is he's trying to sucker a Tothek into chasing after him so that the Phra Ruang's teammates can dispose of him for him. Fortunately, a Tothek has seen a couple of John Ford Westerns. He's not falling for that old gag. But chasing after the Phra Ruang even this far has put a Tothek into a very dangerous situation. Because while he's perfectly safe from the Phra Ruang's torpedoes, he's a destroyer after all, and the Phra Ruang fires deep water torpedoes that are only a threat to cruisers, battleships and aircraft carriers, he is vulnerable to torpedoes dropped by the enemy aircraft carriers. And because he's inside a smokescreen, he's only seeing these torpedoes at the last possible second, although he is getting warning of which direction they're going to come from, because the friendly battleship with him is spotting the aircraft. And then we have that glorious moment when the torpedoes that you fired into the smokescreen to flush out the enemy destroyer miss the enemy destroyer entirely, but sink the enemy battleship on the other side of the smokescreen, just as a kind of bonus kill. So that's great news. Equally great news is that despite coming under continual air attack from the Hosho over there, as well as, at least until very, very recently, getting shot at by 2 battleships and a destroyer, the Koenig Albert that Atothek is divisioned up with is still alive. Not something that this enemy Hosho is likely to be able to lay claim to for many more seconds. Yeah, there he goes, as he was forced to flee straight into the welcoming arms of Atothek's division as he was pushed out of the cap by the members of Atothek's team pushing him from the other side. One of whom has just been sunk by the enemy Kawachi, who now no longer has a big fat -1 sitting next to his name after team killing the enemy Phoenix earlier on in the match. Now, while the Hosho has been sunk, he does still have aircraft, and yep, 2 of them just landed. A pair of beautiful torpedo strikes on the big fat broadside of that Koenig Albert, and the Phra Ruang, with his deep water torpedoes, is also trying to get in on the action. And at least one of the Phra Ruang's torpedoes does hit, but it's the flooding caused by the Hosho's torpedoes that finish off the Koenig Albert. So the Hosho, despite being dead, finishes this match with 3 kills. And it is actually getting quite close here with 3 ships against 4. But Atothek's team have 2 things that the enemy team do not. They still have 2 aircraft carriers, and they have Atothek. Actually, Jingles, while you are correct in stating that the enemy team no longer have an aircraft carrier, the Hosho still has a squadron of torpedo bombers flying around. You make a good point, and those torpedo bombers still seem to have a pair of torpedoes, which means the Hosho has actually managed to secure his 4th kill, 2 of which were claimed after his carrier had been sunk. That's pretty impressive. So now it's 3 versus 3, but it's at this point where that 2 carrier advantage is really going to be useful because, well, the Kawachi isn't exactly known for its great stealth, and while the 2 surviving destroyers on the enemy team are, they can't hide inside smoke screens forever, and are going to have to deal with being plane spotted. But hang on a second, what's this? Atothek is plane spotted. Yep, that dead Hosho is still being a pain in the arse, because his combat air patrol is still flying around the area where he was sunk, and is spotting Atothek. So since you're spotted anyway, you've got nothing to lose by firing. Meanwhile, it will probably come as no great surprise to anybody that the enemy Kawachi, who for the great majority of this game's only contribution to his team was to cruise around the back of the map border, team-killing Phoenixes, has of course sailed in a completely straight line at exactly the same course and speed, and therefore ran into all of Atothek's torpedoes. That just leaves the 2 destroyers, whose only chance to win this match is to kill Atothek first, because, well, it's going to be difficult for them to sneak up on and sink the 2 surviving friendly carriers, but if they're being harried by a Valkyrie every step of the way, they've got no chance whatsoever. And as stated previously, Atothek's team does have the great advantage of still having those 2 aircraft carriers, which means that these guys cannot stay hidden forever. And there goes the Campbelltown, Kraken +1, 6 kills. That just leaves the Phra Ruang, desperately hiding from the aircraft circling overhead inside his smokescreen. With torpedoes closing into the smokescreen, he is at a massive disadvantage here, not just because he's going to get air spotted the second he leaves the smoke, but because in a destroyer versus destroyer fight, a Pan-Asian destroyer with the deep water torpedoes cannot damage another destroyer. Atothek does not have that problem. The Phra Ruang, lurking inside his smokescreen, knows he's going to have to come out and face Atothek in a gunfight. And if it was just the Phra Ruang versus the Valkyrie, that would be a tough enough proposition for the Royal Thai Navy destroyer, because the Valkyrie has the edge in a gunfight. The Phra Ruang does manage to get the first salvo off, but it's not just the Phra Ruang versus the Valkyrie. There are also rocket attack planes circling overhead, just waiting for the opportunity to pounce. And so while he did his best, the Phra Ruang really never stood a chance. And that is probably one of the best low-tier games I have ever seen in World of Warships. I mean, it was a great result for Atothek, obviously, with 6 kills and 70,000 damage done in a Tier 3 destroyer, but it wasn't just seal clubbing, which is what you often see when there's a more experienced player playing at these kind of tiers, because there were some pretty damn good players on the enemy team as well, the Phra Ruang there, and the Hosho in particular, which is what made it interesting, and I think we probably have the Research Bureau to thank for that. as low and mid-tier battles see more and more experienced players dipping their toes into low-tier territory in order to regrind existing lines of ships that they've reset via the Research Bureau. I'm not quite sure what to make of the Kowachi's position at the top of his team, since he quite literally spent that entire game in the top left corner of the map. Maybe I've done him a disservice, but I guess that's a mystery for another day. All I know is this was one of the most entertaining lower tier games I have ever watched, and we have a Tothek, the Hosho, and the Phra Ruang on the enemy team to thank for that. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.